Today we're going to be looking at multidimensional arrays, which are going to allow us to have rows and columns. Now examples of this could be, say, an Excel spreadsheet or a matrix inside of linear algebra, those little boxes of numbers. And an example is down here. We have one right here, we have 2 rows, and we have 3 columns. Now how can we go ahead and make something like this? I want to be able to print it out on screen. Well, first let's start off simple and let's actually go ahead and make the multidimensional array. Now we'll start off the same way. We're going to write our data type. We're going to be using integer data, and you're going to call your array whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call this one the lemming array, so I'm going to write the word lemming. And normally when we're working with arrays, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put one set of square braces, and inside here we're going to indicate how many elements we plan to put inside of our array. Now we're going to be working with multidimensional arrays with rows and columns, so we're actually going to go ahead and put 2 boxes. As you guessed, one box for rows and the other box for columns. The first box will be for rows and the second will be for columns. In case you forget that throughout the video, I'm going to write this little note down here for you. Array, and in the first box rows, in the second box columns. Just something in case you guys forget throughout the video. So we're going to go ahead and work with 2 rows and 3 columns. Now we're still going to put the equal sign, we're still going to put the curly braces here. The only difference is inside of the curly braces, you're going to put more sets of curly braces, one for each row. So you'll put each row in its own set of curly braces, and you will separate those curly braces by a comma, and you'll also be separating the values inside of the curly braces by a comma. Confused yet? Let's just go ahead and actually show you guys what's going on. So first row, we're going to put 1, 2, and 3, separating each value by a comma. Remember, we have 3 columns, which means we're going to have 3 values inside of each row. Now we're going to separate that row with a comma, and we're going to open up a new set of curly braces, put 4, 5, and 6 right here. And there you go. That is our multi-dimensional array. Simple enough. Now that's the easy part. The hard part is figuring out how we're going to print this out. We can't obviously just go ahead and print this out. We can't just use one loop to print it out. We're going to need 2 loops. Now these loops can't be separate. One has to be inside the other one. They need to be nested. So this could be a little bit confusing. I'm going to go extremely slow through this process to make sure you guys know what's going on. So we're going to make 2 for loops, one of them for the rows and one of them for the columns. So let's start off by making the one for the rows. We'll write for, and on screen it says we need to have our initialization, our condition, and our increment. Simple enough. We know that we are going to need to start at 0 for initialization because we're dealing with arrays. Remember, in all the past videos, I always say that arrays start counting at 0. Computers start counting at 0, so arrays start counting at 0. The first position in your array is not 1, it's 0. So we need to start off at 0 here. It's extremely important. So we're going to write integer, and we're going to write row, and we're going to say that is being assigned a value of 0. So we'll start off at 0. Now we have our condition. We know we have 2 rows, so simple enough. Our condition is going to be row is less than 2, because we want to have 2 rows. If we start counting at 0, we have 0, we have 1, and that's it. That's the only things that are less than 2. So you're not going to write less than or equal to, you're going to write less than 2. Then you have to have your increment, which is going to be how much you want to increase by each time you run around the loop, and we're going to write row plus plus, which means increase by 1 each time we pass through the loop. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put a curly brace there for the body of the for loop, and now we need to go ahead and make the second for loop, which is going to be inside of the first for loop. So we're going to go ahead and write for again, and we need to write the same things. This one's going to be for the columns, so we're going to write integer column, assign the value of 0 like before. Always the same thing when you're dealing with arrays. Now you're going to write column less than 3 because we know we want 3 columns. You'll have 0, 1, and 2. That's 3. Now you have to have your initialization as normal. You're going to go ahead and put column plus plus. Sorry, I was writing row there. And now we have our 2 for loops. Awesome. So inside of our column loop, which is the one that's nested inside of the row for loop, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go and write our printout statement. We're going to write cout, and then we're going to write our lemming array, and we're going to write row, which is this row over here, column, which is this column over here. And we're not going to write end line because we actually wanted to make it look nice like this down here. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to put some more arrows, and we're going to put quotation mark, space, quotation mark, which is going to allow us to have these spaces between the numbers here. And we're simply going to end that off with a semicolon. Now, we might be thinking, how are we going to go over to the next column? Or sorry, the next row. We're actually going to go down here, and we're going to put cout end line. Simple enough. Now I'm actually going to walk you guys through this entire process here. Because you have all this information here, you might understand what's going on or have the gist of it, but you don't really know the exact process. So let's walk through it and talk about what the numbers are doing each time. So we're going to start off by entering our loop up here. We're going to enter the row loop. It's going to say we're entering as 0. So right now, row is 0. Remember that. And we're going to keep going until we are less than 2, right? Or keep going as long as we were less than 2. So we're entering a 0, and the first thing it asks us to do is to go into the next for loop, which is the column for loop. We're still going in as row 0, and we're entering this as column 0. So remember that. As long as we were in this one for this moment, we are going to be row 0, and the column 0 is going to be the one that's going to be increasing. So we're going to enter here as row 0, and we're going to enter this array we have here, and we're entering as 0 for the row and 0 for the column. Now, as we saw in the last video, this actually corresponds to a value inside of our array. It will correspond to the first row and the first column, which in this case is 1, or it's the one right here. So it's going to go ahead and it's going to print out 1, and then it asks it to put a space, so it's going to put the space. So you're actually going to get this right here. I'll put another comment. You'll put the 1, and you're going to get the space. There you go. And now you're going to get to the end of the loop. Well, now you're going to go back to the start of the loop. You're going to increase by 1 as the column plus plus increment states. Now you're going to be at column 1, and we are still at row 0. And we can keep going until we get to 3. Now you're going to go in here. Row 0 is going to stay that way. And you're actually going to go to column 1. Now this is going to correspond to the next number over, which is going to be the 2. And they're already separated by that space. It's going to say, put another space. Okay. And you're going to repeat the loop one more time because we are still satisfying the condition of being less than 3. So now we enter the loop again, still with row 0. And we're entering with column 2, which is going to correspond to the 3. And there you go. Now you have that completed. Your first row is completed. Now you've no longer satisfying the condition because we are now at 3. So we're actually going to leave this loop and we're going to go down here. And this is going to say, just go to the next line. Okay, I'll go to the next line. So now you're actually going to be opening up a new line and you're going to be right over here. Now we're not done this first loop here. We're still in the row loop. We're going to go to the top of the row loop, but now we're at row 1. We're no longer at row 0. So we'll go down here again. Oh, it says let's go back inside the column loop, and you're going to repeat the column loop with column 0. So now we're going to enter the column loop with row 1, column 0, which is going to correspond to the 4. Then you're going to go and repeat that again. You're going to go with row 1, column 1, and that's going to correspond to the 5. And then you're going to go with row 1, column 2. Remember this, when I say column 2, that's the third column. So make sure you remember that. It's going to correspond to the 6. And all this, when we go ahead and build and run this, we're going to see that we're going to get the exact same thing as I had over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Simple enough. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll answer them as soon as possible. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll have more content coming up soon.